All right, we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. If everyone wants to very quickly tell us where you're from, just do a quick introduction. Tell us where you're from. If you have questions, you could enter them in the comments field. My name is Greg Ondo. I'll be broadcasting from Northern Virginia in the Washington, D.C. area. Please feel free to introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from. If you have questions, we had a lot of people had sent some really interesting questions in advance, so we'll go through those and we'll get started in a couple minutes. If you're watching this offline, you don't have to introduce yourself. It's for people watching live. And also, we generally have some people that are really friendly, and we'll do an index of all the topics that we cover in the Hangout. So if that's always super appreciated. So if someone wants to keep a running index of different questions and topics that we cover, that way people could jump to specific topics later. But we'll go ahead and let everyone get signed in. If you're watching this offline, you may want to fast forward to maybe about 10 minutes or so in by the time we get all questions collected and by the time we get introductions done. So we'll just do some house cleaning here and I'll just collect questions and we'll get started in a couple minutes. All right, good to see Sal in the Hangout. We have people from Dallas and South Africa. It's wonderful. All right, people from Spain. Okay, so we have Israel. You see some questions coming in, so I'm just going to copy the questions over. So we have London, we have Trinidad. All right, so we have some good questions coming in. All right, so we have Pacific Northwest, some more London, Wisconsin. All right, someone from near Liverpool. All right, so Lake Tahoe. Great, just copying over some of the questions. A couple people from Chicago. Someone from Vienna. That's great. All right, so we have Serbia. I see a comment about the virtual keyboard shortcut not working in 9030. So I have the same thing. So I'll make sure to kind of reiterate that again to our team. Okay, we'll see if there's any more questions that come in from people viewing. All right, we have Moscow in the house. That's great. I see a comment about doing a Chicago users group. Planning to be out hopefully in October. So we're working on getting that scheduled as we speak. Okay, so seeing some questions, just copying over. All right, so we have Barcelona, Belgium. All right, just copying over some more questions. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. Doing some housekeeping. We'll get started. All right, so we have Taylor from Pine Grove. I was just in Schuylkill Haven on Monday. Drove through Pine Grove. Was thinking of you. Just copying over some more questions. You're still copying over questions. We'll get started. Sorry for the delay. Okay, so we have quite a lot of questions to go through today, so we'll go ahead and get started. See if there's any last minute questions before we get going. Okay, just copying over the last questions and we'll get started. Thanks for everyone's patience. Okay, so we'll get started. Thank you for everyone's patience. All right, so some questions we had mailed in. Someone asked, I am unable to activate the audio part editor and the independent track loop function as stated in the operation manual. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll start this off. I'll do a new project. Okay, so a lot of people aren't aware that there are two kind of separate editors for audio inside of Cubase. So once we have the editor here, a lot of times when we double click on a part, we go directly to the sample editor. But there's also another audio editor, and that's called a part editor. And this gives us some additional functionality for just how a lot of people would do comping before the comping started. But to actually get that going, you actually would just go to events you would select the event, and we need to turn it from an event to a part. It may seem like a weird kind of distinction, but now we're in our part editor. So at this point, we could right click and then we could activate what's called the independent track looping functionality, which is and this can be done in the MIDI editor as well. So if I wanted to just take a portion of an audio file here, I could just kind of set my left and right locators. And I'll just do this so it's a little larger so everyone could see it. So I'll just take it into. So I'm just going to click, let's say between here, let's say I want just this portion of the audio to be looped independently. So I want just that little portion. So if we play that little loop, so now that we have the independent track loop, and again, if you don't see it, just right click and then you'll see this little icon here. So once that's been activated, Cubase will go ahead and play on and that part of the audio will just loop over and over and over and over again. So that would be all you'd have to do to set up kind of that independent track loop. So even though that file isn't playing, we could just have that little portion, and now if I wanted to just jump right back into the timeline, we go or activate the independent track loop again. So again, to make an event to a part, again, select it from the main project window here. And then at this point, you want to say events to part. If you have a part that you want to turn to an event, just choose dissolve part. But that's an easy way to have the independent track loop, and that works in both MIDI and audio capabilities. So, but again, you don't see it in the sample editor, but the part editor. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, so we had a question that someone had regarding the FlexPhraser and working with the FlexPhraser for doing like odd meters, like non-4/4 meters. And the question was specifically about like 5/8 and 7/8. And the FlexPhraser is actually just a part of Halion and Halion Sonic. And what it's going to allow you to do is to, just kind of take a particular part, and let's say if I have, let's just make sure I have this particular part selected here. At that point, I just wanted to send it to MIDI channel 2. Let me just... see if my MIDI controller is going to cooperate. Let me just see if it's... All right, I'll just do it from the on-screen keyboard. So what the FlexPhraser, again, will allow you to do is to just kind of take a particular phrase. So, and you could find it under MIDI, or rather under Edit. And when we come here to the FlexPhraser, you could actually activate it. And there's all sorts of, great different, and these are basically different arpeggio patterns. So let's say if I just wanted to come here to like a cello part, at this point I could play a chord, and as I would play the chord, and let's see if my MIDI controller was working earlier but decided not to work, so So as you would play a chord, you could just, I think I have a chord in here. Let me just see if this is routed. So if I just have a chord, so we could play back different kind of arpeggiated patterns. And these patterns you can have, you know, based on 16th notes, if you wanted them to swing, or 8th notes. So there's different basic phrases. And these will generally kind of work in 4/4 time. Some of them will be designed to work in 6/8. But what you could do if you wanted to do odd meter ones is, let's say I have a meter of 5/8 that's going on currently in my time signature. I recorded the flex phrase directly to a MIDI part and dragged that MIDI part onto my project window. And now you could actually just go to the chord pads. So this is my arpeggiated pattern here for 5/8. So let's say I just have this particular pattern here. What you could do is go to, so we're just going to click here, and then you could just simply select the pattern and drag and drop the MIDI event directly to the chord pads. And now when you go to actually play back the different chord pads, you could trigger that particular phrase, and that phrase from that player. So as soon as you come here, you can say, okay, I wanted to go to, you know, my different patterns in your players, and from that particular phrase you could trigger different 5/8, 7/8, you know, 11/8 different patterns, and be able to kind of play that. So as you would hit the particular chord, that would just send it out directly to the instrument. So if you want to do more of odd meter arpeggios, drag it out to an event and then drag it directly to a particular part here, and then you'll be able to kind of be able to trigger that particular pattern at will. So as soon as I come here, you could just have that particular pattern set your arpeggio. All right, let's go through some other questions. Let's see if our comments or other questions have come in. All right, we had a question, and we've had this question come up in some other Hangouts, and someone wanted to actually be able to render in place drum tracks that were both mono and stereo. So if we had a drum pattern, let's say something like this that was going on in Groove Agent. I'll just rewind this back. So let's say I have kick, hi-hat, and snare, and overhead, and room mics. And I wanted to take this particular pattern and render the kick, snare, and hi-hat. Sorry about that. I want to render the kick, snare, and hi-hat as mono files, but the overheads and the room mics as stereo files. So I figured out a way to accomplish this, so I'll show you. The first thing we want to do is to make sure that we have enough outputs activated. So I want an output for my kick, for my snare, hi-hat, room mics, and overheads. So we have those done. I'm going to go to the mixer, and I'm going to take my kick, all of my kicks, and send it to output 1. My snares to output 2. The hi-hats to output 3. Output 4 for the room mics, and then the overheads to output 5. Now what I need to do is to actually go into my VST connections window. And from the VST connections, I want to go to my outputs, and I'm going to have 3 mono outputs and 2 stereo outputs. So, but these don't have to be connected. So I want this mono out for my kick, snare, hi-hat, and then room and overhead. So what I need to do now is in the mix console, come here, and I'm going to select, so this is our kick, snare, hi-hat, room, overhead. So I'm going to select the first 3 here. And I'm just going to hold down the shift key, and this will increment the routing. So it'll be mono out 2, mono out 3. And then I'm going to select my 2 stereo channels. And we'll do stereo out and stereo out 2. So they're all going out of distinct, separate outputs. Then what I want to do is just select the event and go to render in place. And when we go to render settings, I just want to make sure that we either have the complete signal path or complete signal path plus master effects selected. And then in this scenario, we're going to, we could have the source events muted. So now I'm going to click on render. And now we see that the MIDI has been muted as we told it to do. And we have our kick, snare, hi-hat, overheads, and room mics. So 2 stereo, and 3 mono tracks. So if you're looking for a way to do a render in place across, different mono and stereo combinations, so again, activate enough outputs. You don't need to add other outputs. Within the plugin itself, you want to send each of the sources, like kick, snare, hi-hat, room mic, to independent outputs in the mixer by just selecting here. So we have master out 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in this example. Go to your VST connections, add 3 mono outs, 2 stereo outs. In the mix console, I know once you do this once or twice, it's, it sounds convoluted at first, but it'll make sense. Just set the mono out 1, 2, 3, stereo out 1 and 2. And then when you go to render in place, again, just make sure that you have the complete signal path activated, and then you should be all set with that. So for we've had that question a lot, so I kind of played around with it and came up with a solution for you all. So hope that helps some people. And you could, again, watch that over and again, but once you kind of figure out the logic of it, it makes sense. And you could do mono, stereo, quadraphonic, 5-1 out, doesn't matter. So, all right. Hope that makes sense, and we'll move on to some other questions. I'll just read through some comments that are coming in. All right, just copying over some other questions that have come in. Okay. All right, so I got some more questions copied over. All right, so we had a question that was emailed in. Says, basically says, I work from a template where I have several tracks and folders, and all the tracks within the folder go to a certain group. For example, I have drums folder, and all my drum elements are in that folder, and all those tracks are also routed to the group that is called drums, and mentions it, like to capitalize it so it's easier to find. So the question is when they add new tracks to the drum folder, if they could basically automatically be routed to where the other drum tracks, where the routing is. And if there's a macro or a project logical editor function. I worked on this for a couple hours. I haven't been able to come up with a macro to do it, but you know, one thing that you can do is, let's say if I have all of these in a particular folder, and it's probably the way that you're doing it currently. So let's say if I move these selected tracks to a new folder, and let's say if I added a group track here. So our group track's going to be at the bottom here. So if I wanted to, you know, and probably what you're doing now is just, you know, being able to route appropriately here. So say hold down your shift key, and then you could route to all, or I'm sorry, the alt plus shift key. Sorry about that. And now all those tracks can be routed, all the selected tracks can be routed to group one. I don't know a way to, I haven't figured out a way yet to automate that within a macro to go to the currently selected groups. I will continue to work on it and see if I come up with some clever solution. But the project logical editor, which is a great kind of conditional editor, doesn't really do a lot for, you know, so you could do, you know, some different things for tracks, but there isn't a lot of routing functionality within here. So I will continue to kind of dive into that and see if I can come up with a way of creating a macro. I don't know how to approach it. I tried several things the other night, but I will continue to kind of work on it because that's what I could do in hotel rooms when I travel, stuff like that. It's like a little puzzle. But I will continue to work on it. I don't really have a great solution other than kind of routing it through quick controls, which is probably what you're doing currently. So, all right, so we'll move on. Okay, so we had a question. I think this is from Taylor. about wanting to layer different MIDI sources through a MIDI send. So if we had one particular MIDI track, I'll just close this project. Let's do a new project here. So let's say we have, we'll just open up like a Halion Sonic SE. And let's say we'll just load up a guitar patch. Okay. And I will go ahead and let's just load up, like perhaps I'll just do it from another instrument here. Let's do a retro log. Yeah, let's add one more instrument. Okay, so let's say we have this one patch and we wanted to, and we can do this with MIDI tracks. And so at this point, if we wanted to layer, we could just say, I wanted this to go to retro log, turn it on. And then we turn it on here to go to pad shop. And then whenever I would play this one particular instrument, let's get my that particular instrument will just automatically show up here. Let me just set it to all MIDI inputs. So even though only that one particular instrument is active, you could have up to 4 different sounds active as MIDI send effects. So just simply, again, turn it on. And this is one of the things that may not be, let me just check just to make sure if I add an instrument track, it may be just laying out for MIDI tracks. So if we have our Mystic, we may not see the MIDI sends. So this is one of the differences between like an instrument track versus a MIDI track going to an instrument rack. So if you have the MIDI track going to the instrument rack, at that point, we can just enable in the sends there and then turn it on and what destination that you want it to be. And at that point, you could even, let's say if you wanted to add a Mystic here, so now we could play back that one particular instrument sound and have access to all, we could play that one track and have 4 different patterns layered on top of it. So at that point, everything. So you could have Mystic, Pad Shop, Retrolog, and the Halion Sonic SE main just automatically all layered together. So send it to a MIDI track that's going out to, and it could go, the destination could be instrument tracks or instrument racks, but it's gonna, the MIDI sends are only available on MIDI tracks. So if you're not seeing it, that could be why you're maybe in an instrument track versus a MIDI track. So I saw we had a question regarding 2 questions on Halion. So let's go ahead and we'll open up. Get this loaded up. And the first one question was someone wanted to change like the default sound. So if you wanted a different sound, I think, let me just check something out here real quick. So I think if we just go to like a multi-patch here, let me just. So I think if you find a multi-patch, you could just right-click on it, I believe, if memory serves right. And then you could make that the default sound. Just try this here. So I think there's a way to, once you have a multi-sound, to right-click on it. Just kind of forgetting how. And then you could load, you can set as default sound. See, I'll see if I can remember. The other question that we had, okay, got my MIDI controller back, was dealing with Halion Sonic, the Halion Symphonic Orchestra sound set. So I'm just going to open up a particular sound set here. Let's find some string. Okay, so let's say if we want to find, we'll just have a particular, let me just, I'll just start from new here real quick. Hang on. Just to show this. All right, so one of the questions that people I often get is that they have the Halion Symphonic Orchestra and they have a particular patch loaded up, and then when they play, that it's very kind of soft in volume. And, you know, if we go to the macro editor, you know, we could see that, you know, some of the programs will be set up so that your modulation wheel, so if I hold down a chord and move the modulation wheel on my controller, that allows you to switch between the different samples. So a lot of the samples will be like that. So if you have the modulation wheel down, and we can see the modulation wheel on the left hand side here of the keyboard, no matter how hard I hit the keys, it doesn't matter, because it's going to switch between the different samples by using the modulation wheel. And if that's the case with particular presets, and you want it to be based on velocity, just go to the macro edit page, and at this point you want to choose velocity instead. So a lot of them will be set for modulation by default. And then at that point, it's going to be based on velocity of which layer or sample that it's going to play. Or if I have it, again, with modulations, a lot of people will get it and they're like, oh, it sounds like really weak. Why does it sound so soft? And they don't use it. Just use your modulation. So you can use your modulation, but if you wanted to switch the particular preset so that it uses velocity instead of modulation, again, just go to the macro editor, and then right here you want to switch it from modulation to velocity. And you could use other controllers too. So I know a lot of people that like to play with both hands, and they may want to use like an expression pedal to switch and kind of add dynamics that way. But it's a pretty common scenario for string orchestras and string libraries to have different patches that will load and alter the dynamics based on a controller. So it's almost like you're using a bow, for instance, on your MIDI control wheel or your pedal to have control of the dynamics. But if you wanted it to be based on velocity, it's really easy just to switch it to velocity right at that point there. So, and also if you have the Halion Symphonic Orchestra and you're like, oh, why does it sound so low? Just move the mod wheel. And then it's like, oh, it's the epiphany moment where everything will make sense after that. So give that a try, and I think that'll do the trick for you. All right, just going through some of your questions that have come in. Okay, so here's another, I believe this is from Taylor as well. When double clicking on a loop in the MediaBay browser, it always goes to the bottom. Is there a way to have that automatically go like to a specific location? So as soon as I come here to my MediaBay, I could see a number of loops, and a lot of people are kind of used to like double click, and you could add the loop directly like that. But if you wanted to put, let's say, this particular loop in between these instead of double clicking to go at the bottom, what you could do is just select the loop here and drag it, and then you could place it anywhere that you want in the timeline. So if you just come here, say this is my loop, I want it to be at the top, just simply move it, and here it's going to lock to our song position. So again, if you double click on the loop, it goes to the bottom. If you drag, you'll see this little green line, and that will indicate the bottom of where that loop will be placed. So I think that was brought out in like an 8.5 or maybe a 7.5, one of the 0.5 releases. I think that showed up in. Okay, so we had a question about when working with an arranger track, is there a way to see the length of the arrangement without having to render it? I think we may have to render, but let's go ahead and take a look at it. Okay, for those who aren't familiar, this is a really cool part of the program is the arranger track, where we could work in kind of a non-linear format. And this allows us to define like a verse, a chorus, and a change part, etc. So let's come over here and we'll do just a arranger track here and see if we could figure out what the time is without flattening. So I think if we look right here, if we just extend this over, as we add different events here, we can see the song time. So let's see if I add another event here. Let's say we added 2 D sections, and then as soon as we come here, if we slide directly over here, we could see the total length of the song here. So once and we could get to this window once you have the arranger track open. And at that point, on the left-hand side where you see your different arrangements, slide over, and then you can see the song time indicated directly there. So if I wanted to take out a particular part of the arrangement, so let's say I take this out, I'm going to remove that. We'll see it was at 3 minutes and 4 seconds. It's now gone down to 2 minutes and 34 seconds. So you could see the length of the song right there without having to flatten it. So I learned a new trick today too. That's a great question. All right, so we had a question in Wavelab. How do I get CD text to display on my CD player? The regular number for adding metadata didn't carry it over to the CD text display. So within Wavelab, we'll just go ahead and open this up. So let's say if I'm here and I wanted to, let's create an audio montage of my CD list here. If you go to the CD tab and then you go to functions, you can edit your CD text here. So as soon as you have like, a title and a performer, this will just carry over across all of the tracks. The problem is the vast majority of CD players don't read CD text. It's usually car CD players have a better chance of reading CD text, but the vast majority of CD players just kind of ignore CD text. So if you're not seeing it on your CD player, it could be just that your CD player doesn't support it. So it's something that's available within the Redbook CD specification, but it's often not really utilized by the different CD players to work with. So, and some people assume that the CD text is what's used as metadata on, on online services like iTunes or Amazon, but that's really separate metadata. They don't derive it from the CD text at all. So if you're not seeing the CD text and you've entered in, it's probably just the CD player isn't really, isn't displaying the CD text. That's 99% of the time. So it's probably not the answer you want to hear, but that's probably what's going on. Okay, jumping back to Cubase, we had a question on how to bypass all the inserts, EQs, and channel strips in a mix console. So, and this could be done. I was looking for this, I believe, in the last Hangout and had a brain cramp on it. But what we wanted to be able to do is you could actually, I think it's under state buttons. So if you right click, it's probably not the best terminology for it, but if you right click, you can go to state buttons and activate them, and this would allow you to bypass all the inserts, all of the EQs, the channel strips, and the sends. And you can see that there's different keyboard shortcuts. So option click, and then you could just have kind of different keyboard shortcuts for that. So just at the top of the mix console, you'll see these 4 icons. And again, if you don't see that, right click in a blank space and just make sure that state buttons is activated. And then once that's activated, you'll see the IE, CS, S. And again, that's inserts, EQ, channel strip, sends. So that way, if you quickly wanted to do that for a mix, you could just simply, bypass all those if you want to render without any effects or have it come in without any effects, so you could start and see what the raw tracks sound like. So, so that's a way of doing that. Okay, we had a question that was sent in. Someone asked about raising automation by, if they have an automation event, a track of automation, and let's say they're super happy with the contour of the automation, but they wanted to raise it up by 10% was what they had asked for. So if we have existing automation, we could select the automation here. Now, one other question that I see a lot, and I had someone who was like really mad at me at a clinic recently because their automation, they felt that they were blind to the audio file having the automation below. So if you open up the automation panel, and that's just F6, function key 6, you can come here at the lower left hand corner and go to the settings, and there's a show data on tracks, and this would allow you to see the waveform with the automation. So if you didn't want to see that, again, you could just turn on and off that preference. I think it's a keyboard shortcut that you could turn on as well. But someone wanted to raise the automation by 10%. So you could actually just come here and select the automation, and we go into a point where we could just scale your automation vertically like this. So if everything is perfect and you love the overall contours, and let's say the vocal was really consistent and you got like all the plosives down and brought up parts in automation where you needed to, but you wanted the track to be overall just a little bit louder, you could just extend that window up just like that. Now, another thing that you can do to help out is there is a project logical editor for this as well. So if I wanted to take the automation. So what I could do, I think I could actually just select this particular track. And if we go to the edit menu to project logical editor, I'm going to say media type is equal to automation. And then let's just go ahead, and what I want to do is we're going to say trim, and we're going to multiply by, sorry about that, 1.1. So what this is going to do is take our automation, and we're going to choose to transform, and again, media type is equal to automation. Under action target, trim, we're going to multiply by 1.1. So I think as soon as I do this, we should see the automation just go up by 10%. Conversely, if I wanted to, or if I wanted to multiply by 0.9, which would in effect knock it down by 10%. At that point, I could just take the automation and adjust it and scale the automation that way. So again, you could just say media type is equal to automation, and it will do it all for the selected track. So I don't have to actually select the automation. You could save that as a preset, and that logical editor preset could actually be fired off from a user definable key command. So if it's something that you find yourself doing a lot, you could just have a key command to go up 10, down 10%, or just kind of physically just kind of grab it and be able to scale vertically in the center. So the top center area. So it's some easy ways to kind of scale automation. I'm just going to look through some of the comments. Thanks, everyone, for wonderful questions. Okay. All right, go through some of the questions we had. Okay, well, since we're on automation, one of the little videos I did recently got a lot of attention on YouTube, and that was kind of regarding automation for a particular event. So let's say, and someone wanted to just do like a little, we'll call it like an automation bump. So the trick that I showed was to select the line tool and to come and set it to a square wave. And what we could do is, if I wanted to we'll just zoom in, we'll make this a little larger so we can see that a little easier. And we'll just zoom in a little bit here. So if I wanted to just hold down, I think it's, get the right keyboard shortcut. So if you hold down, like I'm on the Mac, and if I hold down Command plus Shift, I could just raise the level just like that. Now, and the question we just got asked, and this is like really handy because I see all sorts of people on YouTube, they're constantly putting in, and they get mad at us because, they had to put in 4 points like this and select the middle 2 points and drag those down. So I see people doing that all the time, and they're frustrated. But again, if you just hold down Command and Shift with the line tool selected as a square wave, at that point you could just do little automation bumps. Now, the question we had asked was, once you do that, you can't see the value that you're entering in. So I'll just check. So we do that. We can't really see the value, but what you could do is as soon as you do it, you could select the value, and then from the info line, you could see the value. And if you wanted to adjust, you could just go into the center axis, just like we were doing earlier, and just have that particular point. It's automatically going to select those two drop down points. So if I come here and again select the line tool as square wave, so as soon as you would just select those 2 points, you can see in the info line right up here the actual value. I don't know of a way to make the value show up before as you're entering it in, but you could just simply select it really quick and adjust if necessary. But I don't know a way to automatically see the value as you enter it in other than kind of guesstimating. Okay, so we had a question about how to record multiple instruments on separate tracks. There's a couple ways to do this. Let me just set up a scenario here, and I assume that this might be or onto different channels. We kind of saw that a bit earlier with the with the render in place, but another method that some people will do is I'll just do a new project. And I'll just go ahead and add 2 different instruments here. Or I'll just add a groove agent SE. Okay, so if I wanted to take, let's say I have this pattern going on. And I wanted to take like the kick and snare and hi-hat and record them to different channels in real time. So what you could do is I'm going to set up 3 group channels, or I'll add 3 stereo channels here. So just stop the playback here. Give me one second. Sorry about that. So we could do some, there's 2 different ways of doing kind of internal routing. So I'm going to add 3 group tracks. And then I'm going to add 3 stereo audio tracks. And this principle could be used for multiple instruments as well. So I'm going to activate multiple outputs here on my virtual instrument. So as soon as I come here, we're just going to say I want outs 1, 2, and 3. I will go to my mixer and just kind of like what we did similar to before. I want to take my kick, snare, and hi-hat to different outputs. Now these outputs I'm going to open up my mix console. So as we play, we're going to have our outputs here for our virtual instrument. And for the routing, I want to send these to group 1, group 2, and group 3. Now for the audio tracks, I'm going to set the MIDI in, or the audio input, from group 1, group 2, and group 3. So the instruments are going to go to groups. These groups are going to be the inputs for these channels. And if I did everything correctly, when we have our instrument opened up here, let's say we'll just play this. And now let me just, sorry about that, it's annoying to watch. We'll just record enable these and monitor them. So now at this point I could just hit record. And we can see the audio being printed in real time. So now when we play this back, I could turn off the plugin and we would have our different sources automatically enabled. And I'm going to have a new computer, so I haven't set all of my Cubase preferences. Let me set one now. I'll just set this tape machine style, so it'll make more sense. So now as we play back, so that's how we can do multiple instruments recorded. So if that isn't what you wanted to do with your particular question, just let me know. All right, so I had a question. Can you please demonstrate the render in place for a mono track? Let's see if I think we'll have some mono tracks in here. Okay, so we had a question on rendering in place for like a mono track. The one thing to be cognizant of and be aware of is some of the settings for different effects. So if I have this particular track here, let's say I wanted to take this vocal file. Let's just listen to it here real quick. So if I wanted to render that, and for mono compatibility, when we go to our render settings, and again, we just right click and go to render settings, if you wanted to maintain mono compatibility, I think you would need to put it onto dry or with channel settings. So I'll just try with channel settings. And all right, so with that, you want it to be on dry or channel settings. And there's different options here when you get into the rendering. So dry will be basically no effects whatsoever. Just completely dry as is indicated. Then we have channel settings. This includes the EQ, inserts, channel, the insert effects, EQ, and the channel strip. And they probably should label these a little more clearly. We get the little pop-up menu. Then we have the complete signal path. So this includes the output bus, and if you're going into a stereo reverb, for instance, it would render it as a stereo file because it involves a stereo effects end, or the output is going to stereo. So if you're specifically looking to maintain the mono compatibility, you can just simply at this point choose dry transfer or the channel settings. Now, if it is a stereo track that you want to turn into mono, at that point you could create a or just a mono output in the VST connections like we did earlier, and then at that point you could choose to set the routing to that track to the mono output, and then it will be down mixed down to mono, I believe. So you can give that a try. All right, so is there a way to get the chord track to show a C instead of a B sharp? Yeah, it's always a fun one. I believe it is a preference, as was indicated. So let's say if I just wanted to add a chord here, the chord track. So as I just kind of put in, my C chord, or just changing a chord, you can just double click. But there are some different, harmonic representations or enharmonic representations. So if you go to your preferences, and it might be under event display or editing MIDI. Let me see. I'll just see if it's in the chords. Just blanking where this one preference is at. I thought it would be under MIDI. It is one of the preferences here. I'm just blanking where it's at. I apologize for that, but it's kind of like a follow chord display or enharmonics of chord track, something like that. I'm sure someone knows exactly where it's at and is commenting on it, but I'll see if I can circle back to that. Okay, so we have a question. Can we bus effects tracks to group tracks and effects tracks to other effects tracks? So let's go ahead and get that set up. Okay, so we have some audio. Let's add a reverb. Do something obvious like a nice delay, reverb here. And let's add a group channel. Okay, so when I select this, I can take this and let's say we'll first send this out to our effects return. All right, I'll turn the return down to kill. And I'll just adjust my tempo here just a little bit. All right, so now I could take this, and if I wanted to go to my reverb return, I could then send this directly to the group. And on that group, so let's say if I just wanted to go directly to the group, so let me just open up this group channel. And on this group channel, you could send it to, you know, another effect send. Now, what some people do is actually just put, you know, send it to a group and use the group as an effect send. And at this point, if you wanted to have a delay on this, you could now just simply come here, add the delay, so the reverb will now feed the delay. So at that point, you could take this effect send, and it just functions just like another effect send. So if you wanted to, again, even if you added another effects channel track, let's say into a chorusing, something like that. I guess you can't. Oh, yes, here it is. So now let's take this. So now you can take, you know, that drum loop, send it into group channel, send that effects return channel to another chorusing effect. So you have a lot of flexibility with routing with that. All right, so see a question, how to very precisely do cuts on waveforms. So probably, usually when I get this question, it's related to snap. And snap is enabled right here, or by hitting the letter J on a computer keyboard. So right now, if I have snap set to beat, I will only be allowed to use my scissors tool. So when snap is turned on, I can only cut at the downbeat. So, but I can't cut in between. But if you turn off snap, you can freely cut anywhere you want down to, the sample level. So if you want to cut right there and right at that point, you could do that. But if snap is turned on, you can't cut as precisely. So my guess is try hitting the letter J, and that will turn on and off your snap, just like that. And then snap off allows you to cut freely. Snap on restricts your edits to the selected grid. And if you don't want it to be by beat, you want it to be by seconds, you could just switch your right click in your master timeline, and then you could have different displays. So if you have it by seconds, you could cut it, have it snap to 1 millisecond, or if you're doing film, you want it to snap to SMPTE time code. You can just have different frames or seconds, different time divisions that are relevant to your master timeline, but everything is at the sample level. But try turning J on and off, and I think that'll do the trick, and you can cut anywhere. Okay, so we have a question. How do I add my own loops and material to MediaBay? So really all you have to do in MediaBay to do this is we'll go to your media menu. So if you have all sorts of different loops, you can come directly to the bottom left-hand corner. And this should probably be on by default. And then there's a little setup, so you can define the locations here. So wherever you have your loops on your file system, all you have to do is just say, okay, my loops are right here. And at that point, just place a check there. And then it will automatically look in that folder, and it will scan that folder for you to have any. So next time you come up, all of your loops will be referenced directly there. So again, you can just come here, the lower left-hand corner, and go to the define locations. And once that's turned on, open up, you'll see your file directory tree. At this point, you can just say, I wanted to see only these particular projects or these particular folders, and then you could have it scan directly for any folder, and then they'll show up in your results list. Okay, so question, how to transfer samples. Let me just make sure I'm reading it right. From sample track to Groove Agent. So let's say I have my sampler track here, and I have, let's say this is my sample, and so now I could just play back the beginning of that file. You'll see these little icon here with 3 arrows pointing to the right. And here you could say just transfer to Groove Agent or Groove Agent SE. As soon as you do that, that instrument will load up in the background, and now the samples are automatically carried over for you. So at that point, you can just transfer all of your different samples. I think it shows up as C3 by default. Yeah, there we go. So that's an easy way of doing that. So once again, once you have the sample track, once you have content in there, look for the 3 arrows pointing to the right. This will allow you to transfer it to Groove Agent SE, to Halion, or to PadShop Pro if you have that license. Okay, so seeing a question, show track functions are not working. For example, show tracks with data. When I select that, nothing happens. I still see all tracks. So let me just jump back to our project. I haven't had this kind of act weird in any way. They'll just activate this project. just revert this. I changed it so many times. Okay, so let's say I'm here. Let me just add a number of tracks. All right, so this is a handy function in the configurations view. So there's a visibility setting here. And at this point, let's say I have a number of tracks, and there's different presets, if you will. So one of them is show tracks that only have data. So these tracks I added don't have any data. So you see that those are just immediately taken care of, or I could show all tracks. Or, so there's different kind of, show tracks that have data between the left and right locators, or that are playing at the cursor position. I mean, these all seem to be kind of working as expected. So, make sure that, one, you don't have any data on it. There could be, maybe a MIDI program change or something like that. But as you can see here, it seems to be kind of working as expected. If you just kind of check that out and make sure you don't have any data at all on those particular tracks. And I think, but I haven't had that misbehave or seen that misbehave yet. So we have a question. Some of the new features in Nuendo 8 that are unique. So Nuendo 8 has added some new game audio connect functionality. So you could transfer like tempo information, MIDI tracks, markers directly into Wise. You also have a new renaming function where you could take like a whole spreadsheet full of file names and be able to rename, hundreds of audio files in one hit. There's also, it comes with the Dolby Atmos panner. We're going to see support for like the frequency EQ plugin. All the Cubase 9 features, sans the VST Transit, will be available. So all the zones. And a really handy randomizer plugin. So if you have like sound effects, you could just randomize those sound effects in very creative ways. So if you have like one sound effect you want to use 13 times, you don't have to use the same sound effect, but you can have subtle variations. And the offline processing has been reworked as well to be very flexible. So those are some of the things in Nuendo 8, and we'll probably do a Nuendo 8 hangout just to kind of walk through all of the new functionality. But new things are obviously like sampler track, which is great for sound designers as well. So question of how can I use a sample synth wave file and some like FL Studio, sounds like piano, if any relevant example. So you could just literally take any audio file. I think I have some piano on here even. Let me just yeah, so let's say if I just wanted to take let me see, I think there's a piano solo. All right, so say right around in there, we'll just take our piano part. And we can just double click, and that will take us into our sample editor. And let me just grab my play tool. I think there's like maybe a single piano note. Okay. So I could actually just kind of take from this piano solo, really nice Yamaha C7. And at this point, I could just go to my, let's just go to my editor. Let's see if I, okay, so I'll take that one single note here. Then I'll just kind of blow this up so you can see it a little better. And then you could go to the range and create sampler track from that one particular note. And now you could, you know, so anytime that you find just one little bit of a single note, you could just right click on any audio file. So even if you want to take like a guitar part, I could select just that file and drag it over. And now at this point, and just play it in MIDI just that easily. So there's a lot of really creative things you could do with the sampler track. But, you know, if you have someone just singing even, you know, you could come here and just say, I think we have some cool vocals in this particular project. Let me see if I can find them. So I'll just take just a one single note here of that vocal, and I'm just going to turn my snap off and drag that down. If I did it right, let me just see. And then even if you want to go to chord pads, you can just be able to kind of trigger different chord pads for, you know, that sampler track. So that's the kind of stuff that you could do with, you know, the sampler control. So any audio that you have, you can now. And if you wanted to make sure it's all going to be kind of the same length, we could just put it directly in audio warp mode, so that when you play, it'll all be the same length, and you could just kind of play chords even just like that. So any little audio snippet, you can just have that automatically be sampled. All right, so we have a question. The vocal line type feature, is it available in Nuendo yet? If so, any, and when it will come to Cubase? It hasn't been integrated into Nuendo yet. I'm not sure, you know, I'm speculating that it may find its way into Cubase. It's generally kind of what happens a lot of times, but no more word on that. Okay, so I see a question about my pan controls. I think I saw this on how to configure pans, pan format of the square type. And I think this might be referring, let's say if we go to the mix console here, where you can see our panner set like this, and that's often when we have projects that have a 5.1 output. So if you have a 5.1 output, so say if we go to our VST connections somewhere, or a group, there's probably a 5.1 source, and that's why you see it kind of go geometrically like that for the panning. So it's just because there's a 5.1 element in the mix that you see the stereo panners that way. I think that's what it's referring to. Okay, so we got a question. Could you so a question about inserts in your template. Could you work with inserts in your template and still work in direct mode by switching off the inserts? So this, I think this might be referring to direct monitoring. So if you're in direct monitoring, the software inserts, unless it's coming from like a UR interface, will basically, be bypassed. So you don't have to bypass them. So direct monitoring mode will just, of most audio interfaces, will pass the signal directly from the input to the output without kind of going through the audio engine. So it's not going to go through the inserts. So I don't think you have to bypass them when in direct, because it's basically doing that for you. Okay, so we got a question. What's better, higher number of CPU frequency or higher number of cores? The great answer is both. So you could always, the more horsepower you have, the better. Some plugins don't scale incredibly well across multiple cores. So, some plugins are guilty of that. Some will do it just fine. But if you're looking for recommendations, get the fastest processor you can afford, because it'll just last longer. You can hold on to that computer longer and use it for longer before upgrading to the 2 or 3 generations later. Okay, so I'm seeing a question regarding MIDI control length via macro. You could just do, I don't even think you have to set up a macro. I mean, you could set up a macro to set the division, but it's really, when you just go to advanced quantize, there's, let me find a MIDI part here. You can quantize the lengths of events as well. So as soon as you come here, you just go to edit, and then under advanced quantize, you can quantize the MIDI lengths or the MIDI event ends. So that way you can say, I want all these notes to be 1 beat long or half a beat long or 4 beats long, whatever. Okay, so question, is anyone using Cubase on a 65-inch Ultra HD screen? How does it work? You're upgrading from your small 55-inch. So I've done a lot of demos on large 65-inch screens or larger, and it's a lot of fun. So it's a great, as big as you can get for monitors is great. Okay, so I'm just reading a question about copying MIDI notes. If you want to copy MIDI notes with Control T, it sets the first copied MIDI note after the existing MIDI note. I want Control D and not drag it to the right place with the mouse. So I think if I understand this correctly, let me just copy some of these notes here. So I think what you're doing is something like that, which will just copy it. What I would do is maybe if it wanted to be like on, if it wanted to be separated by, a little bit where it didn't go directly after, is maybe just move the events and then select two of the events. Or just do it manually. So if you wanted to take these notes here, you could just hold down the Alt key and you could copy and place it where you want. But the controller Command D will just kind of duplicate the events based on where the last event ended. All right, I'm going to go back through some of the comments, and there's a lot of comments I have to go through. We'll get some more questions. Thanks, everyone, for wonderful questions. I'm just going to read through some of the comments. All right, so I'm seeing a question in standalone Groove Agent or in the Grand. Do you need a MIDI controller to play the notes? I believe you can trigger the notes with the with Groove Agent. You could actually program the notes in with your mouse, but not send MIDI information. I don't think you can send MIDI information from the pads to transmit MIDI information. I believe it's the same for the Grand. So you could play them with a MIDI controller, but you can trigger the samples with the mouse, but it's not going to internally sequence in the standalone versions, I believe. So it would probably make sense to have a MIDI controller to work with those particular plugins. Okay, so we had a question maybe about Groove Agent, about separating the MIDI notes and not the audio. I'm just going to reread it, see if that's the question. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. So I believe the question is kind of asking how to actually just kind of break apart the MIDI notes to separate tracks and not necessarily as audio, and how to accomplish that. So let me just jump back here real quick, and let's say we have a MIDI pattern here, and we'll just look at this as our drum editor. Okay, so let's say, I got kick, snare, hi-hat, and I wanted to break these into individual MIDI parts. So if you go to MIDI menu, just it's usually dissolve part, I believe. Let me just so once you have it set to like a MIDI part, you could just go to MIDI to dissolve part. So select it and then click on dissolve part. And then you could choose separate by pitches. And then you could actually see, if you kind of extended out the parts, you could actually see kind of this is the kick, this is the, the hi-hat pedal, the hi-hat open, snare. So again, once you have that part selected, you could just go to MIDI and choose dissolve part. And that will put each MIDI note onto its own separate track. All right, just going through some comments. I'm catching up on the comments. So just give me a second, and I appreciate everyone's patience. All right, just read through some of the comments. And seeing some of the comments and what we're talking a little bit earlier about kind of MIDI data copying, so it could be, let's say if I'll just add a MIDI track here. So I'll just draw in some notes here. Let me just, and I'll just have my snap on. So let's say if I have one measure of MIDI notes here. All right, and let's say I have this for I think maybe some of the questions are like the to be able to take these three notes, and maybe I'm incorrect, but to have these notes start to duplicate, but if we wanted these three notes to start on the next bar. So how to copy those events, but maybe keep the space. Let me see if I come here, we may be able to do this with kind of a range edit. Okay, I'm just going to open up my in-place editor here real quick. So if this is, you know, what you want to do is maybe you have a scenario where you want to copy the three notes here, but let's say starting at the next bar, sometimes it may make more sense to just copy the events on the project window, and then you could do it like that as opposed to within the MIDI editor. So I'm not sure if that makes sense for what you're trying to do. But I'm just seeing if there's a I don't see anything that will kind of keep that space, but maybe if you could clarify a little more, I'll read through comments. Maybe it is clarified. All right, so I've seen questions about with saving all the samples within Halion within the project. So let's say I have, you know, and kind of doing an archive. So let's say I've taken, I'll just kind of take a particular sample tracker, and let's say I'll just create a sample track from something, and now I want to send it to Halion. Okay, so this is one of the things that I like to do, like especially when I have a lot of samples. I'm kind of anal about making sure all my data is, you know, properly stored. So I think once you're here, that you're able to, I'm just trying to remember where it's at, but you know, what you could do is just basically just archive the particular settings. So if you just export the samples here, I always have, if I've done like my own samples, I always have a sample folder within my project folder. Like, you know, we have an audio folder, a video folder, etc. So I always will just export the samples directly into my project folder under something called samples. That's what I've been doing, and that way I know that when I move that one folder, that all the samples used in that particular project will be, that I've created, will automatically be carried over once I move that project folder over and archive it. So that's one thing that I do to kind of keep all my samples. And the sampler track, as someone mentioned in the comments, is really great at, you know, storing all the sample content within, you know, the pool of the project, and it's very well organized. But if you're going further with Halion, at that point, just kind of right click in the directory tree and just export samples, and then you could just simply have it all stored in one file location. Okay, so I'm seeing a comment that the layering tip would be a nice Q&A video. So I'll add that to the list for Q&A videos. So thanks for reminding me on that. And one of the things that we are doing, if you're not familiar with, is kind of breaking like little parts of these Hangouts and questions that people send me into different question and answer series of videos. So we already have a lot done. So there's a lot more that are kind of finished and are going to be released soon. So and any questions that you guys have, say I really want a video on this, I've been kind of creating them in my free time. So we're just kind of making sure that we have resources available for you all to get the most out of the tools you have. Just reading through some more comments. Thanks for your patience. Okay, so a question on MediaBay about resetting the filters every time you open it. Let's take a look. All right, so let's say I go to my MediaBay and all of a sudden I have a search filter here. Let me see if there's a preference. There's a button to do it automatically. don't know of a way, and I could do some more research on this to have it automatically reset the filters. Let me see if there's a keyboard shortcut. There is a keyboard shortcut setup, so if you wanted to reset when you open the MediaBay, you could create a macro to when you open MediaBay to then have it reset all filters, or just set up a key command for that. So I don't know of a way off the top of my head to have it automatically. So if I close out MediaBay, my search filter will automatically be carried over. So let's just try it again. So yeah, so that kind of sticks until you just kind of hit that. So you could make a macro with 2 steps to do that. Let me just take a look in any other settings here. Yeah, I don't see any settings for that, unfortunately. Sorry about that. All right, so we had a question about setting up kind of your organizing plugins to particular folders. Let me just reread it, make sure I understand it correctly. So if you want to organize your plugins, it's really easy to do with kind of your plugin manager. So what this is going to allow you to do is, at this point, you could actually just see kind of all of your default plugins here, but you could actually start off with an empty collection. So you can say, these are, you know, my favorite plugins or whatever. So at this point, we'll just call it faves. And right now, you can do is just drag and drop, and you could create your own you know, structure for different plugins. So at this point, you say, these are my favorite reverbs. You could add a folder and now just be able to drag and drop and add different plugins just like that. So this way you could, if you know, you never want to see particular plugins, or you only want to see these for this particular situation, you could just come right here and organize all of not only your VST effects but your VST instruments, and then you could just kind of toggle back and forth between all of your different ones right here, so you could organize all of your plugins so that they don't become incredibly overwhelming for you. Okay, I'm just reading through some of our questions. Okay, sorry, just a lot of questions coming in. We'll try to get through all of them here. Okay, so I saw a question like Greg Clemmer mentioned about kind of controlling his levels. It worked well for him. I see a question, someone asking about purchasing. Give me information on how to purchase Real. So I assume if you want to purchase a copy, you could do it from a dealer in your area, or the Steinberg online shop. So you could be able to purchase copies there. I'm not sure if I'm misunderstanding your question. I'll just go on a bunch of our questions. Okay, so question about, it's not specific to Cubase, about recording direct signal for guitar or bass, probably for reamping purposes, like a line level. I know a lot of people will stick to like -12 to -6. Sometimes they want to make sure they have the signal out of the guitar hot enough to redrive if they're doing reamping, to kind of drive the guitar amp louder if necessary. So make sure you're just not totally under it, but you can have some. I think I have a project with some DI guitar parts here. We'll take a look at what they did that worked well. Sometimes it's hard to realize how low of an output that guitars can have direct, but we'll give you an idea here on this particular project. And the guitars are going through the VST amp rack. So here, if we wanted to look at, this is the guitar part, and we'll just do some statistics on it. We can see where roughly this engineer did it. He's kind of hitting, looks like between 6 and minus 24. So it's around this guy, who's was in a big hard rock band in the 80s. He's aiming for around 6 for his direct guitar. So if you want to listen to him. So, and then if we wanted to bypass the inserts here for each of those, just to kind of listen to it. So that's kind of where the levels are without the guitar amps. So around minus 6 dB seemed to work well for this project for going into software amps. And I'm sure it would work well for reamping because that's what he did in the project that I just replaced. Okay, so we have a question. When recording with the arranger track, can you only record one part at a time? I haven't tried that, so let's give it a shot. I'll do just a 2-bar arranger track here. Okay, so it's just jump here. So it looks like it's only going to do the one particular time. Let me just go ahead and try that one more time. Let's say. Just try one more thing here real quick. So it looks like it's only going to record one time for the length of that. And then if you would flatten it, then you could do, let's check one more thing. It looks like you could flatten it and then you could record more tracks on top of that. But let me just see if anything else showed up in the part editor. No. Yeah. So it looks like it's only going to be for that one particular part. I'll play around with that because I seem to remember some trick with that. I'll play around with it and see if I come up with anything. Is it possible? Question is it possible to route group tracks to another DAW, basically to print, like, and you mentioned to do it on Pro Tools on Mac to print. It's the other program isn't going to accept our input. Some people will do internal routing through a sound card, but that's always messy. But the quickest thing to do, if you don't want to have two different sound cards, is, let me just jump back to this project. So let's say we have lots of different elements going on, MIDI, virtual instruments, audio. Instead of like having to print in real time, I know some people will set up like, you know, do all their busing and turn it into, you know, and just send it to groups internally and set the groups as inputs. But an easier way is just to go to your file menu to export audio mix down. And then here you have a channel batch export. So you can say, I want my output channels. I want all of my group channels, my effects channels, my instrument tracks. I wanted my VST instrument channels. I wanted to have all of my audio tracks. And then what this will allow you to do is basically, you know, set your left and right locators, and it will give you stems of every single track. So instead of having to feed it into another program, you could just actually just export stems, and it'll all be time-stamped broadcast wave files. So at that point, it's not any problem. So your effects channels, your instrument tracks, you know, your groups, your output channels, they could all just be rendered, and then they're just audio files. They could be loaded into a Cubase project, but they're time-stamped audio files that could be imported into any other program quite easily. Just reading through some more questions. Okay, so I'm seeing questions just on like the MIDI drums, how to break that apart. And I think, you know, we showed that with the dissolve part. Let me see if we have, we may have some MIDI drums in here. So let's say if I just have, you know, so again, once you have kind of different parts, at that point, just go to your MIDI, and then once you have the drum selected, just choose dissolve part. And I think we went over that, you know, just a couple minutes ago, but if that didn't do the trick, just let me know again. You know, I'll be circling down through the comments. All right, so someone had commented about the preference I was looking for earlier. So under event display, chords and pitches, here it is. All right, so here's where the preferences for the chord display, and you probably want the enharmonics from chord track selected. That's always a good choice to have. So thanks for someone for pointing that out where I had my brain cramp earlier. So I see a question, how long did it take me to learn all of this to this point? I guess I've been working with Cubase 26 or 27 years. So I've been with the company for almost 25 and a half years now. So it's been, I get to learn something new every day. It's great. All right, so I'm still seeing a lot of discussion on the splitting MIDI drums. So I'll show it one more time here, just in case. I'm not sure if I'm just out of sync time wise. So we have our drum track here. Select it, dissolve part. Choose separate pitches and hit OK. And then each one of the individual drum sounds will be split out. So just in case that wasn't clear from earlier. All right, so getting a question about like group editing and tracks that are out of sync. So I think I have a project here that or maybe not. All right, so All right, so sometimes when you're doing group editing on particular tracks, you may run into different scenarios. We just revert this because I altered it, where you may get a message that some of the tracks are out of sync. And generally, if you're doing group editing, you could generally ignore that message in a lot of ways. But why it's kind of giving you that message is as you're doing group editing on drums, and you'll see this group edit function. This drummer actually kind of did this all in one take. He's ridiculously good. So as soon as you kind of see that group editing function, now anything that you do for the different tracks and the drums will be applied to everything kind of within that folder. So I know some people that will just set a left and right locator by hitting the P key and then just doing an audio bounce selection. And then at that point, it'll render new files that will all be the same length. Where it could be, a lot of times you can ignore it. The one thing that it may creep up in is if you're doing multi-track drum quantizing. And when you're doing that, it may introduce some phase issues. So, if you have one folder that's just hanging out a little bit longer, or maybe there's an overdub and his samples are off, and it's just kind of giving you that warning for phase coherence. So what some people do is, again, just kind of select the different files and be able to just render new files so you know that they're the same length. So you could do that if it's causing problems. But a lot of times you can ignore it, even, for a lot of different editing scenarios. All right, so the question, can we copy plugins from one screen, one track to another one? We'll give it a shot. Okay, so the only way I could think of, I don't know if there's any tricks for that. I know some people will just kind of go directly here on a main project window and copy the inserts there, but I realize it's probably not what you want to do, but it's a pretty easy method to do that as well. I don't know of a way to do that, but I'll play around with it and see if I can come up with some modifier key to do it. But I think you might have to do it in the mixer to make it easier. All right, so question, how do you see the inputs and outputs at the top of the channel in the mixer? And that's just going to be, there's some different places for it, so you can actually kind of come here. You know, there's some different functions, but it's one of the racks. So if you choose the racks, and then you could just see your routing. And at that point, that will show. So if you don't have that turned on, just click there in the racks, and then you should see all of your input output choices directly there. Okay, question: how to is there a way to delete multiple tracks so delete multiple tracks that have no signal on them? Let's see if we can do this. It might be a project logical editor function. So let's just go ahead and add some empty audio tracks. Okay, so we have 4 empty audio tracks. Let's try a project logical editor and see if we can do it. Or otherwise, we might have to create a macro. But let's see if we can do it in a project logical editor. So we want to set it up to delete. And our filter target is okay, so I think we can do it here. So here we have 4 empty tracks. So we set up a project logical editor to say we're going to delete all media types where the property is set to event is empty. Let's see if this works. Cross my fingers. Yep. So again, if you wanted to come here, we want to, in the function, choose delete. We'll choose all media types. If you want it to be just audio tracks, you could do that. Or if you want it to be, you know, all, you know, if you have empty MIDI tracks, we could do that. But then you want to say property for the second line. Property is set and event is empty. So that's a great question. Thanks for that one. That was a good use of the project logical editor, and I'm glad that the developers are smart and made me look good. Okay, so question on the, you know, how to export a Cubase project to be opened up in other DAWs. You know, the fastest, most reliable method is just to do the export audio mixdown and do the channel batch export. And that way you have time-stamped audio files that can be just loaded up. Each DAW is going to be different and will have different capabilities and functionality. But that's the way that all the programs will be able to import audio files and start them at the same time quite easily. So that's the best method for getting all your files to be translated over to another program. Okay, so we had a question, is there a way to auto-populate chord pads based on a key? So if you actually come here, you could actually just come here to this icon. You could actually load up different chord pad presets. And here, you know, once you see this, there's a number of different keys that are already set up for you. So you can say major B, C sharp, C, D, you know. So all of your different keys will be available as presets plus a number of other presets. So again, if you click here on the second part, at that point you could actually just do chord pad presets. Now, if you have a particular piano part, here's another trick that you can do. So if you have a piano part like we see here, and just look at it in the editor, and say we'll just look at it in our score editor, and then what you could do at this point is right click, and we could go to chords, go to chord track, and say generate chord symbols. Sorry about that. So now it's generated our chord track for us. And if I wanted to go to my chord pads, at this point I could just come to this and I'll say assign pads from the chord track. And once you do that, then it's automatically carried over directly extracted from the piano part itself. So that's another way to populate the chords. All right. So we had a question, how to take a VST instrument and make it stereo. Great. So I'll just do a brand new project here, or we'll just actually go back to So we saw earlier how we could do different, you know, rendering for your VST instruments for mono and stereo, but some people may want to have a particular patch loaded up and for it to be in mono. So let's say if I listen to like this synth patch here, you can hear all the delays kind of pinging back and forth in stereo. If you wanted to have that be kind of a mono sound, and you wanted, you could just go to spatial, and at that point we could choose mono to stereo, which sounds counterintuitive at first. And then all you have to do is kind of set your width, and now that's in mono. If I turn this off, may not translate so well over the Hangout. And I think you could also just, if you wanted to send this to a group, let's add a group channel. Let's make it a mono group. So we could take this retro log, And at that point, you could also just send it to a mono group. So I'll just turn this off. So if you want kind of a monophonic sound, check out the mono to stereo plugin, and then just activate that, click on the mono button, and at that point just put the width all the way down. If you want it to be processing, you could just simply add it to a group, and at that point you can just have it saved exactly as you want, and that could be set to mono. Now we had questions on track presets. So let's say if I come here, I have my synth sound, and at that point, if I wanted to, add, my EQ, and if I wanted to just come over here, let's throw on like a little bit, maybe some modulation effects. Let's just throw on like a bit of a phaser. So if I wanted that to be called up, I could just right click here and save a track preset. So we'll just call this bass phaser. And this kind of works the same way. We could do it for audio. So once I kind of have all those different things set up, at that point I could delete this track. And when I go to add a track, I can say, okay, let's add, I think it was an instrument track, and then, or I'm sorry, you could actually just come right here and load track presets. And at this point, I could just, let me make sure I have the, may have to just search, may have to just rescan my MediaBay. But at that point you could, oh, sorry, I just have a, so I'm just going to add, I think it was an instrument track. Or let me just, sorry, I just having brain cramp. It's at this point. Oh, we were going to add track using the VST preset. Sorry. So here's my bass phaser that we just did. So now that's going to be loaded up, and I hit play. So again, when you do that, just right click, and then you could add track using track preset. So if you know that, like, this is your studio piano, your studio drum kit, your vocal setup for this singer, you could just save it as a track preset and call it up at any time. So see a question. We seem to get this every hangout about 32-bit VST plugins. So you're gonna have. We decided to not wrap 32-bit plugins for stability reasons, but there are still third-party solutions like JBridge that people will use, which still work fine in Cubase 9. So I see a question, can we talk about effects channels and group channels? So we did that just a little earlier. If there's questions that you had and what you saw earlier, just let me know and we could clarify that. But we did go over it a little while ago. So I see a question, will Cubase support large touchscreen monitors? I know a lot of people are running, I'm not sure if it does the multi-touch stuff, but a lot of people I know are moving towards touchscreen monitors like the Surface Pro and seem to really like it. I even have blind friends that are doing it and love it. So, so it's kind of interesting. But I don't think it does where you can do like 8 faders with 8 fingers, but for navigating and transport stuff and editing, there's a lot of people are doing it already pretty well. All right, so a question, how to record MIDI and virtual instruments and audio at the same time. And this is kind of routing through like a group or an output. So let's say if I have a MIDI pattern here, I'm just going to load up the kit with patterns. All right, so in this, I want to actually set Groove Agent as the MIDI out. I'm going to take a group channel, which we have here. I'll just do it as a stereo. I'm going to add a stereo group channel. That's our mono group. Okay, so what I'm going to do is and then let's add an audio track. Okay, so I'm going to take the Groove Agent here, and I know this is a little convoluted, and we're going to route it to group 2, and this audio track, its input is coming from group 2. So I'm going to take the MIDI track here. So Groove Agent's actually going to spit out MIDI. When I hit record, that audio is going into the group. To group 2's output is going to the input of this audio channel. So now just hit record. We'll have this follow the transport. So we see the MIDI and the audio be recorded simultaneously. So I know some people will just do that for live stuff. If they're a really good keyboard player, maybe they know that this keyboard isn't going to be there later. They'll record the MIDI and the audio from the keyboard simultaneously. So that's a pretty common production technique. All right, we're going to see if we have, we're just about 3 hours. I'm going to have to go pick up my son. Is there any other quick questions? I know we probably missed a couple. If you have a quick question, if you wanted to go ahead and fire it off before we wrap up. I'd like to thank everyone for the wonderful questions that you guys sent in. This is always a joy to me. So any last minute quick questions before we wrap up? I hope everyone has learned a tip or trick today to help you kind of with your Cubase. If you have questions for future Hangouts, you could always email me at clubcubase@steinberg.net. You could always, send me ideas if you have for video tips and tricks. We could do that quite easily as well, but I'll just see some more comments coming in. All right, so I see someone wants to know when Cubase 10 is coming out. It usually goes like in the past it's gone 6 to 6.5 to 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5, 9. So there could be a pattern there. But I'm sure there's a lot of German developers working on great stuff to really help you guys realize your creativity. See if there's any other quick questions coming in. If not, we'll wrap up. So seeing people that are, feeling bad that they came in to the last minute, it will be archived and available to stream forever and ever on the Cubase YouTube channel. So if you missed it, just came in, it's no problem. It'll be available. And if you guys sign up if you subscribe to the Cubase channel, I think you're automatically notified when the Hangouts happen. Also, make sure you sign up for the Facebook page, all that good stuff. So that way you can be notified when these events. And again, any questions that you want covered in a Hangout in the future or questions that you want done in a Q&A series video, just let us know and we're happy to do those. Okay, I was seeing a question on device panels. So I'll plan to do device panels in the next one. They'll probably be a little more involved. And for ducking effects on like a vocal, or for kind of doing that with reverb, you could try experimenting with some different types of side chaining. And we have a video in the works for that coming soon. All right. Okay. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thanks again for everyone's wonderful questions. I hope everyone has learned something. I always enjoy doing these. It's really helpful and fun for me, and it's great to see people from throughout the whole world. And just let us know what you want covered in future events, and we'll go ahead and get started. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time. We should have 2 different events for next month, and look forward to seeing you at the next Hangout. Take care.